question after 45 minutes. Just like,
Yeah.
do not hesitate to say.
Yeah, I'll be sitting there, so
All right, yeah.
I will be keeping track of time.
Okay, I'm not really good at that.
We left the last 20 minutes for audience questions, but if you are still, having a dialogue, that's really fine. Don't feel like you have to stop right at 20 minutes. And I'll let you know when to wrap it up.
Sounds good. Sounds good. Yeah, I feel like the questions are always sort of coming up on the fly here in the discussion. Start time as well, right?
Yeah, that's fine. Yeah, so I'm raise the hand. The audience will be relying on you for prompts and cues, so you can just go ahead and say, you have a question, raise your hand, and I'd be happy to become questions. So the idea is to do the questions during the discussion, not so much wait till the end.
Yes, I think that's, well, I mean, depending on how, people are sort of talking.
Sure.
The reason why no reaction from
Hello, hi. Valentina. Nice
yeah, but if there's like a lively sort of discussion, I think you guys meet here.
Okay.
I'm Dereck.
Yeah, so you just help the audience.
Yeah,
right?
absolutely.
You can tell them if you have a question, feel free to raise your hand anytime. Or you can wait until the middle and ask if anyone has a question.
So good.
Okay. All right.
All right, so...
Then I can be not sleeping in the plane.
Yeah, okay. But everybody introduce
Yes,
themselves.
exactly.
That's easiest because yeah, it's so much easier. Absolutely. Yeah.
So first 5 minutes, like, feel free to say whatever you want. Self-promotion as well. Yeah.
Position.
Exactly. We're recruiting.
And by the
we're
way,
the best one. We have a nice program.
Seminal study,
So, it's
pioneering methods.
exactly.
You saw the
On the map. Like
you were
No, that I will.
How long are you staying?
Until Sunday.
Oh.
So Sunday I have to be pretty early. 2.5 days now to visit some places.
Well, you may look a little bit blue sky.
Yeah, apparently. I mean, this is me. Fantastic. So that's you, I guess.
You'll have time to have some fun.
Right, yeah.
Do you have any plans before the
No, not so many plans, but I was discussing with a few people from San Francisco here.
first time here?
Yeah.
Oh,
wow. Oh, yeah, I've never seen it.
They are the
Yeah.
usual to do.
That's one of my
Let me there's a woman who's a traveler, and she has a Google map where she's put pins on amazing things all around the Bay Area. It's a great place. She charges $25 for her list, but it's one of the best.
Seriously?
Yeah, I know.
How can she control that I don't get the list and give it for you for 22?
Well,
She didn't work with Italians at all.
yeah.
She will be out of business tomorrow.
Probably. I don't know how much.
I have it for 20.
But it has a bunch of, the big landmarks that everyone knows about, but lots of small things that folks don't know about. So I'll at the end, I'll have to get over to
I don't have a car, so I can probably well, whatever I can reach easily. I mean, after all this
She walks, just walk.
Yeah, exactly.
Just walk. It's slow, it's small.
Yeah, so this is what I want, right?
You can also take the ferry to Angel Island, take the ferry to Tiburon.
Valentina, nice to meet you.
Valentina.
Hello.
Hello.
Thanks so much.
Nice to meet you.
Thanks.
Hi, Frédéric and Romain. the ordinary sector session. So first I will be more small, like some self-promotion, like this is what it is. And also she tries to be as loving as possible. So the first chunk of something will be more like towards like a little more like in theory more academic. But I think like the idea is just like get like all of your perspective on each one of them. And then
I just want to say taking notes, thank you.
You guys, although again, like really interesting. And then if we have time, I really don't know how much it will take, but we have time, we'll sort of wrap it up with like global vision and sort of like, very kind of okay. So that's like the kind of plan. Maybe just go through the first two questions and it should be fun as well.
It's good to have a plan. It doesn't matter if you don't do a course.
That's exactly that. Like, I think the plan is good, like not following the plan is sometimes better.
Yeah, exactly. And the last thing is at the end, so don't run away.
Okay, good. That's your brother.
We're playing over anyway.
We might have one too many chairs, unless you're sitting, you're going to sit as well.
I think I will just.
Yesterday they were sitting.
They were all of them were sitting.
But
I think for you standing Romain is better.
Yes, I mean, I think it's better
Yeah,
than
it's more
so
dynamic.
yeah, let's get rid of this one. And if I'm tired, I'm going to stand inside.
Okay. Should we take a seat?
I think what time is it? Yeah, it's fine. Oh yeah, we start. Yeah, okay. Yeah, sure. Go ahead. Of course.
Hello everyone. I'm delighted to welcome you for the second day of the HealthAI Symposium, co-organized by UCSF QBI and the Consulate General of France in San Francisco. And we are going to start the day with a discussion about generative AI in clinical practice. So I invite Romain Pirracchio and Paul Walter, Valentina, Pedoia, Jean-Frédéric Petit-Nivard, and Thomas Walter to take the stage.
All right, good morning, everyone. Well, first of all, thank you so much to QBI, UCSF, Institut Curie, the French Consulate for organizing that. It's actually very exciting. And I think this panel will be very interesting. I'm just going to test like a new phase of my career and like be standing up here and like, maybe if you feel that I'm doing a good job, I'm try to become a stand-upper. After that, which may be like more successful for me as a next step of my career. Anyways, I will be moderating this discussion. It's really super exciting to have this panel here. We have like a mix of people with different background, different perspective, and that's what is actually very cool today. Is that we'll be hearing from different perspectives, but I'm sure the vision is in common between like all of them. And that's exactly what we would like to get at. Like, what is it that is driving us all, and how can we make that happen as a community around data science and AI? So I will start off by letting you guys introducing yourself, telling you a little bit about what you're doing, and just before we do that, this is really meant to be interactive. Like I'll be like probably like walking around the room and asking you like if you want to say anything. So feel really free to sort of like participate in the discussion. Not meant to be a lecture at all. It's really we want to capture like really your insights, your feedback as well. I think that's what's going to make this session very interesting and maybe unique. So let's start, and maybe Dereck, take it away.
Sure. Hi everyone. Can you hear me? Oh, good. Thanks for having us. My name is Dereck Paul. I'm the co-founder and CEO of Glass Health. We're a company that builds AI clinical decision support applications. We specifically build for physicians, and the two main functions that we work on are assisting clinicians with generating a differential diagnosis, which is sort of the list of diagnoses that they're considering, and then in generating a draft of a clinical plan. We founded GLASS in 2021 during some of the worst days of the pandemic, coming from a place of seeing how difficult it is to practice medicine in the modern world, whether that's how badly understaffed our healthcare system is, or the complexities and difficulties of providing evidence-based care at a time when things are, the literature's expanding rapidly. And then, in the midst of a pandemic, what we know is changing very rapidly, and what the best care is changing rapidly. So really trying to assist clinicians with providing clinical excellence to their team. You can think of us as a journal or clinical reference like UpToDate or Dynamed, except for that our team edits prompts, AI context, fine-tuning data sets for large language models.
Thank you. Valentina?
That's awesome. My name is Valentina Pedoia. I have a double appointment in part of my time is here at UCSF as an associate professor in the radiology department, and I am with the Center of Intelligent Imaging. I worked on the aging of the musculoskeletal system and using AI to merge data that comes from imaging and other sources, biomechanics, for example, and to give an holistic description of the aging of the musculoskeletal system. And in the second part of my time, I am the computer vision lead at the Altos Lab, which also works in understanding the role of aging and how AI can help in reversing disease, considering aging as any other stressor that we go through our life. So to find a way that can reverse the process of aging and reverse the process of disease. In my time at Altus, we are way more on the preclinical and preclinical phases and drug discovery phases. So I have the pleasure and privilege to look at all the framework from all the different resolution of imaging, so from molecular to light microscopy to histology to in vivo NMR, and the whole life cycle of drug discovery through clinical application. I'm very excited to be here today.
Thanks, Valentina. Jean-Frédéric?
Thank you. Yes, so thank you for inviting me. Very happy to be here and surrounded by great panelists. So I'm Jean-Frédéric Petit-Nivard. I'm the Chief Commercial Officer at Owkin. Owkin is a tech bio that was founded in 2016. Today we're 350, and what we aim to do is try to recreate the way we discover and develop new treatments. So that's a very bold ambition, and what's powering our vision is the way we can leverage novel AI methodologies to, I would say, explore complex biology and try to derive novel insights from building predictive models and interpreting the results from those models. Today, the way we do that is we have a network of academic partners we work with in Europe and US. That's about 50 leading cancer centers. So we work with, for instance, in the US with MSKCC and University of Pittsburgh, and in Europe, centers such as King's College in the UK, Gustave Roussy in France, Charité in Germany. And through the collaboration with those academic centers, we're able to get access to meaningful patient data, patient cohorts, and perform different research collaboration that allow us to gain a better understanding of what's driving diseases and what's driving also response to treatment. And so today we're happy because we had the opportunity to grow thanks to collaborations we've built with both academic partners and pharma companies. And right now I think we're very excited by recent results we've seen in generative AI, because it's a testament to what is feasible, and how those technologies applied to healthcare could potentially help us do to better cure diseases and identify novel therapies. So we're on this journey. It's a very ambitious journey. It's a long journey, but we're very excited about what's to come.
Thank you so much, Jean-Frédéric. Thomas?
Yeah, thank you very much for inviting me, and thank you very much for coming, obviously. So I'm Thomas Walter. I'm professor at École des Mines. That's one of the traditional engineering schools in France. It's actually a school of mining. Nowadays, we are doing little mining, unless you count data mining inside. Yeah, and so I'm directing a research group, which is also part of Institut Curie, and so Institut Curie is a big research center and hospital dedicated to cancer. And yeah, so I started actually my PhD in the medical image analysis domain. So I was working on diabetic retinopathy, automatic screening. So that's a long time ago. And then I moved to basic research. I moved to the MBL in Heidelberg, where I was then more interested in developing methods for computational phenotyping in large high-content screening. So this is really more basic research, but it has, of course, also applications in drug screening that are more clinically relevant. And then I moved to Paris again, and I got my position, my current position, and now I'm kind of connecting these two ends. So I'm still continuing in developing methods for fundamental science, where we really want to understand basic cellular processes by imaging approaches and by the computational analysis of imaging. But I also work a lot now on computational pathology, where we analyze large tissue slides in collaboration with the pathology department at Institut Curie.
Thank you so much, Thomas. Maybe just like very few words about myself. So my name is Romain Pirracchio. I'm a clinician by training. I'm an anesthesiologist and a critical care physician. I'm also a professor of biostatistics. I've been working in the realm of AI for 15 years now. I work at UCSF with the Chief Research Informatics Office to deploy AI at UCSF. I'm also the AI editor for JAMA, which is one of the big medical journals. Okay, let's jump right in. One of the things that I'm hearing, I've been hearing that for a long time actually, is that there's a disconnect between the promises of AI and the way AI is actually penetrating the healthcare. And if you talk to a lot of people, they're like, okay, well, AI is very cool. Like I have AI in my iPhone, but like, what about AI at the bedside? Is there like a real disconnect? Is there like any frustration from you guys to seeing that the penetration is not where we want it to be? What can you tell me about that?
Yeah, maybe I start. No, or do you want to start? Okay. No, please go ahead.
There's this disconnect in different places. I think, Valentina, you know more about this than I do, but definitely in radiology, when I'm talking to chief medical information officers, that's the place where they have done the most implementation of AI. It's been brought into workflows in a way that's part of daily practice. In a lot of other places, I think there's sometimes AI that folks don't know is there, whether that's your sepsis alert or that you're very used to. But I'd say specifically the use of large language models in healthcare, that has not been done. And I think we haven't been able to do it because we haven't had the performance that has kind of taken the world by storm over the last couple of years. And now I'd say most of the leaders at hospital systems that I talk to, they want an AI strategy. They're looking for the safeguards and the safety and the clinical validation that's needed to then go ahead and implement this. But I would say if you look at what Epic is doing, or you look at what companies like Glass is doing, the implementation is going to come fairly fast in the next year or two.
Let me add a point. So on, you mentioned something very important, that that AI is it's maybe where not people are seeing that, and that's probably where most of the disconnect happened. If you ask 5 years ago, we would expect AI to be penetrant in the diagnostic process. I'm talking about imaging in particular. In the diagnostic process, have like AI-assisted diagnosis and prognosis of the patient, and that's very complicated. It has a lot of liability issues and a lot of ethics concern. The part of the workflow in which it was easier to implement AI and where it's actually penetrant, completely deployed in clinical practice, are in a hidden part of the workflow, like acceleration of image acquisition, for example. Today, MRI exam take 15 minutes and was taking 45 minutes with 3 years ago. And all the MRI sequence are AI accelerated. And similarly for other application, synthetic imaging and everything that is under the hood, but completely changed. So you probably wait less for an MRI exam today because of the AI. So it's actually more penetrant than what we think.
So what I'm hearing is that, and maybe it's important for like those of you guys, or maybe the one that your students, or the one who are sort of embarking in an AI journey, is that those folks shouldn't be discouraged by the fact that, you know, in appearance, like there's real AI, because there's actually a lot of AI that is already sort of happening in healthcare in the back end. Now, at the bedside, maybe not so much yet. I don't know, like, do you guys have any experience? Like, are you guys developing any sort of AI that could be applicable at the bedside that is not yet applicable, and you're sort of like wondering why, or you're sort of experiencing any sort of like roadblocks that you want to share with this great panel? Yeah.
It's more about data management. Hi, I'm Amy Wessel. I'm a co-founder of Ocomera. That's a Paris-based biotech, and I'm an American. So something that we've experienced, and I'm very curious to talk to you guys about it, is especially Owkin, for example. Anytime we want to get data sets from several different institutes, you run into like, well, who's allowed to handle the data? And so what we were trying to do is come up with ways that we could predict a patient's response. And we can go into more detail about that. But a big bottleneck for us was, okay, how do we have a framework for sharing data, patient data, that is going to be universally accepted? And there is no such thing. And that was a huge bottleneck. So I'm curious to hear what your magical way of solving this problem is in collaborations of, say, like 9 or 50 partners. Thanks.
No, that's an excellent question, and for sure, Owkin started off in Europe, where GDPR and compliance on access to patient data is very high, and ever since the start, we tried to tackle this problem. We haven't got a secret recipe. I think it's several things that play. Right now, I think one thing that's helping everyone is the fact that we're, trying to use the same way to codify health data. So there's several frameworks on that help then, access data sets from several centers and reduce the time it takes to curate the data. One of the technologies we're using, we've been pioneering it for a long time, is federated learning. Basically, it's the ability to train model across distributed data sets without having to pool the data. And for sure, multiple healthcare centers don't want their data to leave the premises of the hospital, and we understand why. That's why we've been pioneering this type of technology, is just to allow us and to allow the centers to remain the custodians of their data. And that has allowed us to ultimately access meaningful data sets distributed across countries in Europe and in the US. It's something we're implementing for our partners. We have a strategic alliance with Sanofi, and we've accessed maybe 6 or 7 data sets from 6 or 7 different geographies. But I wouldn't say it's easy. There's, normalization, harmonization, data prep, and you can't cut from that. So it's not a magic recipe. But maybe if I may, just coming back to the implementation, I think there's something where you mentioned, what about the bedside? And we're lucky. We started off in 2016, and so I think the moment where I was most proud of Owkin is when actually our research became concrete for patients. And we had a tool, and the tool was regulatory cleared as a medical device and is being implemented now for clinical practice. So it's a diagnostic tool. It started off with the clinicians telling us, basically, I need to screen my patients for this specific biomarker. Right now, it's very costly process, might cost several thousands of dollars, might require 1 or 2 months. Can you implement an AI tool that would do that with routine data and maybe, a turnaround time of 1 day? And so we're very proud because basically our research was converted into a diagnostic tool that is currently being used in clinical practice. It's a CE-IVD tool that screens for MSI biomarkers, so for IO therapies in oncology. And we have another one in breast cancer to predict relapse at 5 years. So those tools, those AI models that were initially publications, ultimately became regulatory clear tools that help potentially patients receive the best therapies and ultimately enhance their chances of getting better outcomes. So that's for sure. It's a long process. I wouldn't say it's not long. We know the healthcare industry is very regulated, but when you get there, I think everyone's really proud, and it's the reason why we do our job today. It's to get those kinds of results, I think. So it's coming. It's slower than in other industries. We can't say like ChatGPT and OpenAI. In 1 month, we have 1 billion users. That's not the scale at which those types of solutions get to the medical industry. But I think ultimately that's good news, because then we would have problems, just coping with those solutions.
Oh yeah, do you guys want to comment on that?
Maybe I can comment on this. So you have the impression that maybe that indeed the process is very long. But if you look a little bit back, when I did my PhD thesis on screening diabetic retinopathy, which is a severe eye disease, there was absolutely no way that was going to be used in practice, because the accuracies that we had at that time, this was around 2000, they were way too low, right? I just knew that, okay, I make a contribution and maybe somebody else will kind of, develop something further. Today, we can actually make it, and there are a few examples for diabetic retinopathy. For instance, there is now a tool, an autonomous tool for artificial intelligence that actually makes the diagnosis in this screening context, right? So I would just say it takes that long. That would be my answer. But the direction is pretty clear. So we have had a technological disruption. So we really have today tools that we did not have a couple of years ago, and this is going to impact the clinics very, very much. And we see the first examples, and so I'm pretty positive with respect to that, actually.
So one thing to add is that sometimes it's not even the algorithm that need to perform at a certain level, but it's the whole ecosystem that cannot be distracted too much. I was involved here at UCSF with one of the first FDA approved software was detecting a pneumothorax and life-threatening condition in the ER. The model was too fast, and it was showing the results to a tech. And the tech is not allowed to practice medicine. So the algorithm is actually approved with a little lag. Mm-hmm. So it was actually make it slower than what it could have performed, because the results should not be shown where the person is on the bedside, and the tech should not be exposed to the results, because it's not allowed to practice medicine. So the technology was there before the whole ecosystem was ready, which is, I think, things that are still happening today.
Yeah, maybe I can just react on this, because I completely agree on this, right? So the first step is always the technical feasibility. Are you in principle able to, detect this or that lesion, or to make this or that diagnosis, right? This is the first step, and you work on a very homogeneous data set in order to see whether this is technically feasible, right? But once you have this, then, well, everybody gets very excited, and you think, well, okay, this is now solved. But actually, then you start to upscale. Then you have to deal with biases. Then you have to deal with biases between hospitals, between countries, between different health systems, between different ethnical groups, and so on, right? So there's a lot of hurdles to be taken. So you have done the first step, but then you have to take the next step. And then is exactly what you have said also, right? Then you need actually to ask yourself another important question, which is, what exactly is the use case? Okay, technically we are able to do this now, but how exactly are we going to use the artificial intelligence in the clinical practice? And the funny thing here is, this is not the same people who can answer to that question, right? It's no longer the computer scientists who make the algorithm, and not even only the medical doctors who came up with the idea. It's also, it's about logistics, infrastructure, cost, economy. Yeah. So yeah, it takes long for many good reasons, actually.
Great. Dereck, do you want to comment on that?
One last comment. So one, on the question of the data sets, we run into this problem too. And one interesting way that we've begun to approach this is, for our base model, we actually use synthetic data. A mix of synthetic data that's created by other models, and then have humans get involved with reinforcement or with editing, fine-tuning data sets. That's very time intensive, it's very expensive to do, but it avoids us relying on EHR data. And EHR data is often a very messy data set for what we want to achieve. When we have talked with health systems about their data, what I try to do, especially from the entrepreneur's perspective, is understand the incentive structures that are inside the heads of the key decision makers. If they don't want their data to be part of this larger consortium, there's usually good reasons underlying that. Sometimes it's around safety. Sometimes it's around they want to ensure they're de-risked in terms of a data breach. But other times it's that they think that's an important proprietary data set that they can monetize sometime in the future. And so trying to figure out, okay, well, if we do fine-tune our base model to your data, is there a way for us to revenue share or something like that? So instead of fighting the incentives, we try to get aligned with them. And then oftentimes that helps us move things forward.
Thank you so much. Very good point. So let me try to maybe summarize what I'm hearing here. And let me know if you agree with this summary or if you don't. Just like trying to get my head around all the great comments here. So it looks like what we're talking about is really about sort of the pipeline for deployment. We've been largely algorithm-centric for the past 20 years. It's time to be consumer, and by consumer I mean patient in the first place, healthcare system provider-centric. This is what we're talking about. And there's like a number of steps here. One of the steps is talking about the data and how can we actually use the data in real time to actually power this algorithm in the real world. Second thing, and of course, this touches on liability, safety, monetization, possible monetization of the data. The second thing is workflow integration, fundamental, of course. And the last point, which I think Thomas was sort of like touching on, is really how can we monitor the performance or the bias of an algorithm in terms of predictive performance and also in terms of bias towards some subgroups when the algorithm is actually deployed in real life. So all of that is really very much of a sort of a post-deployment sort of pipeline that we have to work on. And I'd like to dig deeper into that. Anything else, like any other thing that you guys like identify that we should sort of like dig deeper in? Yeah.
Thanks, everyone. Kale Fox here. I'm from UCSD and Variant Bio. I really appreciate the perspectives. One of them, though, I think we're missing is centralization. It's like all of these data sets get concentrated in specific places. You mentioned Epic, for example. That's probably one of the most, I don't know, power-hungry or corrupt institutions in this country in terms of progress in this space. But if everything's centralized and there's only one rain catchment system for individual data sets, it makes it really hard for us to de-risk things like bias or, you know, many of the kind of, not to be a doomer or whatever, but I'm just wondering what you guys think about that. Like, what are the opportunities to democratize access to those things?
All right, so it's all about one of the 3 points really about data. So centralize the data, getting like general access to data. And you know, since we're talking about that, do we really think that we need access to all the data? Do we need to data share? Do we need to generalize data access? Or can we just share the algorithms and apply them at our sites without any sort of data sharing at all? No data sharing, no liability, local customization of the algorithms? No, I'm just saying. Is that a model? Okay, Jean-Frédéric. Oh, Dereck.
I think there are a lot of different ways to think about this, and you mentioned many different things, but maybe I'll just focus in for a second on bias and equity, and then talk about this problem of fragmentation in data. So one of the ways that I like to approach these things is to start by setting what is the goal? What are we trying to achieve? And then do a deep analysis, the first principles analysis of what the barriers are to the goals, and then start to plan action towards that. So sometimes, and this comes from this experience of being in the entrepreneur seat, in the CEO seat, where you have to be extraordinarily practical, which is that, you know, the U.S. healthcare system is deeply fragmented, and of course these data sets are siloed by these capitalist structures. There are changes in laws and changes in our society that could lead to something that's different and that could be a lot more like systems in other countries where the data is centralized and you could access it. But there's from where we are right now, the power that we have as a single company, we can't change all of that. But we still can set as a company that our goal is to ensure that AI CDS promotes and advances health equity rather than diminishes it. And then from there we go and say, well, what are the problems? What are the problems with large language models in terms of bias? Is it that they will suggest a treatment for one patient who has this demographic identity and then not suggest that for another one? Is it that they're pulling a race-based algorithm that's debunked and putting it as part of a treatment plan? Is it that they're not trained enough on how what you should think about for a patient who is pregnant or could be pregnant? Maybe it does not have thoughtful language in how it's addressing a patient. So we break down and look at what the problems are, why this isn't performing well. And then for each of those problems, we think about what a solution could be. And there might be various different solutions that go from changing the pre-training to changing the fine-tuning to changing our prompts to changing where the model is implemented and who gets to see it and how do we approach it, what you allow it to be used for. So anyhow, what I'm saying is that our approach is forced by the scenario that we're in to be deeply, deeply practical and to look at what the actual problems are that in the performance of the application, and then to try to come up with technical solutions to solve it.
Thanks. Jean-Frédéric, maybe. So, I mean, it looks like Owkin's like really pioneered federated learning, and so to some extent, like sort of like avoiding or like finding sort of a way around like global data sharing in a very sort of agnostic manner. So, what can you tell us about that? Like, is federated learning really sort of like the ultimate way to get around the data problems, or is there like any step further without any sort of, again, like data sharing at all that we could imagine?
Yeah, I think ultimately I want to break the myth a bit about federated learning. For sure, it's it's a method that works well and we use very often. And the main advantage is not having to pool the data, which is a big advantage because pooling the data presents risks. It's very costly. It's time consuming, and basically you're concentrating the data at one area, but you're losing basically the link to the source, and that means basically you need to pull the data at frequent times, and it's very complex. So our vision is like we should use the technology to allow us to train the models where the data is being generated, instead of adding an additional layer saying, oh, we need to pool before we start training the model. So, and federated learning is one method. There are other methods that maybe, have less performance in terms of training the model. There's ensembling, there are other methods. And for sure, we feel it's the right method. We've invested a lot. Has Owkin pioneered? I think in healthcare, it's a technology we believed in for a long time, and we're very happy that, in 2023, we got our first Nature Medicine paper that demonstrated the potential of federated learning across 4 sites to predict response to neoadjuvant chemo and triple-negative breast cancer. So that's a paper we published earlier this year. So it's just, showing to the scientific community that there are other ways, and that, data pooling is not required. It's not, there are other methods that you could investigate.
Yeah, so maybe I just would like to react on this, and I fully agree with you. It's just that there is no way that all the data is going to be pooled. But if there is some large initiative that's, for research purpose, makes a huge data set available, this can have a real impact. And this has happened with the TCGA, right? So the number of papers that have been written, analyzing this kind of data, the genomic data, and also the pathology data, is just incredible. And in addition, what is very important, you get many people, many research groups on board. Obviously, if Owkin is really specialized on that, but there are other computer science groups that might not go through all this trouble. I mean, it's even if you do federated learning, I mean, it's not so easy to set this up with all the contracts with all the hospitals. It's not something which is accessible to an ordinary group, which might have a very good idea, right? And we cannot afford as a society to not use these people, not to not listen to those people, right? And so I believe that if we have some large initiative to have these huge data sets published, this is a huge advance, and the TCGA is a very good example for this. With all the drawbacks it might also have, it really had a huge impact.
Thanks. One last about the data, and then I want to switch gear.
It's short. I cannot guarantee it. Or maybe short. What it was said is it's so important, and the fact that the data part is so painful. It's almost that when we finally have the data shared, when finally the data user agreement is signed or federated learning is implemented, Dereck, we will almost get there tired and say, okay, now let's just apply a model and call it a day. When actually the technical problem began there, because the data will be dishomogeneous and the ground truth all over the place, and you have a meniscus lesion here and not in New York on the same image, and all those things that we don't even consider. And the sharing the data and have centralized data should be the easy part, and actually make an algorithm that can that can accommodate all the diversity of the data should be where we put our emphasis. And I feel like there is still a big missing pieces in harmonization and making model and making loss function that are trained adversarially in a way that cannot just recognize the fact that this image comes from this hospital or this other hospital.
Yeah, I totally agree, and I think it's a nice segue into the next topics that I wanted to touch on, which is essentially like this big disconnect between, again, like the very much algorithmic-centric phase where we need access to retrospective data, essentially data sets. That's great, and even if we're able to do that in a very seamless manner, that would be awesome, but that would be like very much sort of a primary step. The rest, which is, I think, what you're getting at, Valentina, which is getting access to the actual data from the EHR in real time with all the caveats and all the limitation of how messy the data sets are in real time, this is like another thing. Which brings me to the next topic I really want to touch on, which is really workflow integration. So I'm going back to you, Valentina, because I think you mentioned that initially. So what do you have the experience of radiology, and it looks like radiology is definitely like one of the area where AI has been largely implemented. What do you know about the radiology experience in terms of really working on how to integrate the AI in the workflow of the radiology sort of like teams, and how can we sort of improve that, and how can we think of that now that we're like having like bunch of algorithms that could make it to the clinical arena, but like this topic of workflow integration is still very much of an important one.
Yeah, it can be completely transformative. Starting from, right now, while we speak, there is a fellow neuroradiologist, almost at the end of his career as a trainer, that spent his entire day doing protocoling. So reading the clinical notes and deciding if the patient need a contrast or need a certain MRI or need a certain what is the MRI protocol that it will go for. And that is a job that a large language model definitely can do much faster and much more efficiently than a neuroradiologist. And of course, he can do it definitely sparing the time of the neuroradiologist. And that is just an example in something that is just changing the workflow and not really changing anything else, but it can be completely transformative. Similarly, for when the time that the patient is in the scanner, typically a standard MRI procedure is run. So if you have a certain disease, there is a certain protocol for your disease. And I can clearly see as a possibility the idea that an AI system can tailor the protocol on the patient needs while the patient is on the scanner. So while the patient is on the scanner, a model can identify the presence of a problem and add a new sequence, a more specific imaging or a more specific exam while the patient is there, instead of having a regular exam, send the patient home, the patient goes home, the radiologist does the radiology report, talk with his clinician, okay, come back because we need a second exam because we found this particular problem. That can happen all that day of the same exam. If there is a model that suggests, okay, I think there is this problem, let's add one specific MRI scan.
Thanks. Now I want to poll the room. Like, do you guys have any experience with integration? Good experience, bad experience, frustration, successes? Has any of you really gone through the process of trying to integrate a product, an AI product, into the clinical workflow?
Hi, thanks. I'm Graham Walker. I'm an emergency physician with the Permanente Medical Group, which is the medical group that represents KP in Northern California. No, we've actually not integrated. And as the gentleman behind me said earlier, really the challenge is with Epic. Everything in clinical medicine lives inside the EHR, right? And so certainly the challenge has been Epic being open and available for integrations because you're going to be much more successful if your tool is inside of Epic. You're going to get better adoption. You're going to get better usage of the tool. People are more likely to like the tool if they're not having to go to a separate browser window, go to a separate app. And so that's part of the biggest challenge, I think, is everything works best in the EHR, but the EHRs aren't necessarily the best partners in terms of an open playground for people to find easy ways to, have a hook to get into their system.
Thank you so much. Well, now I want to go back to Dereck. Because Dereck is working on clinical decision support tools. Like, there's nothing more sort of fundamentally related to the clinical workflow than a clinical decision support tool. So what's your take on that, Dereck?
Right. I'm extremely optimistic about this, and it's because I've seen how this is going to work really, really well. So maybe everyone can just imagine with me for a second. You go into a clinic room. You pull up an AI application within the Epic or whichever EMR you're using. And this happens already. There are applications that are inside of Epic that are running on browsers or more deeply integrated inside your Epic interface. This already happens. So we know this is possible. As Dr. Walker said, this is very, very difficult to do, and they have some relationships with some companies that allow a different level of integration. If you're outside of the club, it's very hard to get in. But it's certainly possible. Imagine going to see your patient using ambient listening while you're talking, while you're seeing that patient. The AI is able to take the transcript, convert it into a history of the present illness. Before you've gotten back to your computer to look at what's been created, that history of the present illness has been analyzed, an initial differential is there, suggested focused history questions that you forgot because you're human are there. Physical exam maneuvers that you should do before you leave the room are there because they will help you narrow your diagnosis and be helpful to you when you eventually get labs back and imaging, right? And then when you can bring those labs and imaging in as context, the way you would bring them into a note writer, right? You might use a dot phrase to bring them into the note writer. You can bring them into the AI and use them as context to complete your AI query, so it's considering the same things that you as a human would be considering. Maybe it can consider much more context than you can, right? Why do we do chart biopsies? Because we can't read everything that's there. But as these context windows get larger and larger, the AI is going to be able to review more and more data than we can. So imagine all of that. Imagine it drafting. It's very important that we do, that our orientation toward these models is very important, right? You have to treat these things right now as a medical student. A medical student can say something brilliant on rounds, but they can also make a mistake. They have to be supervised. I think actually what we'll move towards is AI that acts like when two doctors are seeing a patient versus one. You know what it feels like. It feels very different if you're going to go admit this patient with a friend. So I think that's where we're going to go with this. The hard part about this is actually that it requires a different skill set than all of us up here. I think it requires building beautiful, great products is a different discipline than computer science and engineering. But it's one that's been well traveled and is known, but usually the best product people in the world, they don't want to work at medical companies. They want to work at Tesla and SpaceX and the rest, right? So actually setting ambitious enough goals and being dedicated to building beautiful product experiences for patients and for doctors is a challenge. But one of my favorite companies is Pixar, because you have to be both a computer science company and an animation company in the same building. Glass has the same challenge. We have to truly be a clinical reference company and a clinical decision support company and an AI company in the same building. And that's very, very hard to do. But I think ultimately to start to overcome some of these barriers that we've been facing for long, long times about implementation of great products in the clinical environment, that is the energy and philosophy that I think will help get us there.
Thanks. So it's, again, like a very nice segue into I think some of the other topics that I wanted to discuss. I want to go sort of down the path of implementation and deployment. And I think, from what you said, Dereck, there's an important aspect in terms of the interaction between the user and the models in general. So maybe one question for you, Thomas. One of the things that I'm hearing when I'm talking to my colleagues in terms of like deploying predictive models is that they're having a hard time buying into the use of predictive models because they cannot imagine the way they would be able to criticize the information that will be given back to them. In that aspect, do you think that Gen AI would generate something that the user can immediately criticize because they essentially prompt the model to produce a product and they can now read the product and see whether or not this is compatible with what they wanted? This ability to criticize on the fly the product with a very sort of like tangible arguments, is it something that will promote the use of this technique or facilitate, I should say, the use of this technique versus the whole good predictive models that I've been working on for 15 years?
It's a very difficult question, to speculate about how well predictive AI will be accepted as compared, generative AI will be accepted as compared to predictive AI. So my gut, I only can, ultimately I don't know, right? But my gut feeling is, in terms of acceptance, it is not the game changer. In the end, it is about performance, about benchmarking, and if you know that a predictive model works very well, and you have proved this, including with biases and everything, I mean, it's a complicated procedure to get there. But then I would suspect that this is what can be trusted, right? And then, of course, you can think about explainability also, right? Explainability can make also a difference, but whether this explainability really comes from the generative aspects, this I'm personally not so sure, right? But besides that, generative models are great, and they really make a difference on another level, because technologically, right, they provide new avenues, because algorithmically we do something different, and the interconnections between different data sources, they are better represented. They lead then to these foundation models, and they bring another aspect into this, which is actually the zero-shot learning or few-shot learning, but that is necessary to deal with rare diseases. So I'm not doubting the importance of generative models, but in terms of acceptance, me personally, I'm not convinced. But maybe there's some other opinion on this.
Sure, Valentina.
Yeah, there is a role for sure in patient education. So we are very, very well responsive to visual aid in general, and I got the proof of that with the Orthopedic Institute here has deployed a compositional MRI technique that look at the protoglycan content in your cartilage, which produce a very beautiful red and blue maps that tell you the collagen and protoglycan in your cartilage. And the orthopedic surgeon show this to the patient and say, look, this is all red here. You need to lose weight because your osteoarthritis is progressing. And the next visit, the red is going down, and the patient is happy about the fact that the red is going down, and he feels better. And the way, and surgeon came back to me and said, you have no idea how much it changed my interaction with the patient, the fact that I can show a picture that is red and blue and say, look how your cartilage is degenerating here. Mm-hmm. And I can clearly see a day in which we have a way of, instead of doing a prognosis with a probability of developing a certain disease or a survival curve, to actually say, this is your profile, this is your image today, and this is how your image will look like in 3 years from now with this profile. And this is how your image will look like if I change this and this and this and this modifiable risk factor, your BMI, your diet, and how much a patient will be way more reactive to see the difference between his future in a radiology image visually, instead of, oh, your probability of developing osteoarthritis changed 3%.
Great, thanks. Okay, so maybe, I mean, time is flying. So if it's okay going over like by 5 minutes, I just want to ask like one question before we wrap it up, and maybe to Jean-Frédéric. Again, like going down the path of deployment and what it means like for the future of these techniques. Maybe one of the ultimate sort of step there is what happens after deployment, when in the lifespan of the algorithm, when the algorithm is alive at a given institution and data is drifting. COVID is hitting without any sort of pre-alert. So there's like a huge disruption in the data, in the system, in whatever that may affect the algorithm. What is the responsibility of the companies who are like bringing the algorithm to life in terms of monitoring their evolution over time?
No, thank you, Romain. Yeah, you raise an excellent point. So basically, as far as I understand it, and I'm not an expert, when you bring a tool in the clinic, you need to have a certain threshold. You need to demonstrate clinical validation, medical utility, and there's a lot of things you need to show to the regulators so that they ultimately believe that your tool is safe. And that's good, and that's why it takes a lot of time, a lot of energy, and the validation of those solutions is a long process. And then when you bring those tools to the clinic, you're what they call the legal manufacturer, and that puts certain responsibilities on your shoulder of maintaining the tool, of doing some audits, checking the tool performance. So all this is written, and that's why in our company we have a head of the product and regulatory and quality. All those people in the organization are responsible to track if there are any deviations. For sure, when we bring those tools to the clinic, I think what's really important, and Thomas alluded to that, is we need to make sure that we've tested them enough to see if ultimately they generalize well, if the signal that's underlying that the model is actually picking up in the data is robust, so that there are no chances, even if the data drifts or the patient population drifts a bit. If the signal that was picked up by the model is still there, then there's no reason, at least in my perspective, I'm not an expert in AI, that the model would drift. And for sure, in when we developed the model, just before saying, oh wow, there's amazing performance, it's great. We all know that you can overfit. We all know that there are biases in the data. And one of the things we always do is go back to the interpretation and look at what has the model actually found to help it make the prediction. And do we feel the signal that the model is picking is robust? It's built on biology that can be explained, and clinicians and medical experts we talk to feel it's reliable. But so to your point, I think there's of course responsibilities, and there's a responsibility of the company providing those tools in the clinic to check that there is no drift and that the model performs as planned for the intended use and the claim that was defined in the medical device filing, and that's how it should be. So
for our work, which is, I sort of see us as a Netflix to some of the clinical decision support companies that came out in the 90s, and we try not to reinvent the wheel on clinical excellence. So AI. Section editor for cardiology who oversees the prompts, oversees the cardiology contacts, oversees the fine-tuning data sets, is a new job that hasn't been done before. but the people that we're bringing to do this were previously textbook editors, were previously editors at Up to Date, were previously editors at major medical education podcasts. They create clinically excellent content and keep it up to date and state of the art. That's what they know how to do. Then those folks, especially when it comes to generative AI, we're using a lot of end-shot learning or fine-tuning to get these sorts of performance and outcomes. We also have to have those teams work with the clinical informatics team who think about what's involved in these models. Are we changing them over time to address drift? And then you have to have another team, which is clinical validation, who is in charge of benchmarking against degradation when things change, who are in charge of ensuring that you don't have decreased performance in certain cases, looking at bias. So it's actually a gigantic team effort, and it certainly is something that is extremely complex, and humans have to be very involved in it at this time. I think there will come a time where we have complex AI agents that can do some of this work for us, but right now we rely heavily on human minds to be involved in making these adjustments and supervising the performance.
Thank you so much. Well, we're at time or a little bit over. Thank you so much. It was fantastic. I mean, I really enjoyed it. I hope you guys enjoyed it too. Thanks so much for the panelists. It was really extremely insightful. And next time we need like at least 2 days, I think.
Yeah, and feel free to continue the discussion during the break right now, and see you there at 11 for the last panel about ethical consideration of AI in healthcare. Thank you.
Let's
commencé un peu à traiter du pied, à observer les opérations. Et en fait, on utilise dans l'Institut Pasteur de technique.
D'accord, ouais.
Je sais pas si tu vois Charles Barroux dans le domaine qui travaille pas mal. Bon, bref, mais en gros, on est sur des puces, on arrive à mettre des cellules en structure, de micro-filtrage. Donc pour le moment, pour faire ça, c'est genre des modèles statiques qui durent à peu près, ils sont vivants 15 jours, et tu peux tester à l'échelle des médicaments. Mais on cherche à faire des modèles de perfusion pour tout ce qui est antibody, etc. De la famille.
Et on pourrait essayer de savoir avec toi, parce que moi ça m'intéresse. Et en fait, je travaille pas mal avec le labo de Pedoia. Voilà, parce qu'en fait, on fait ça à deux scales. En fait, on fait ça à un macro scale avec une culture et et après, on fait aussi un système de puces perfusées où on fait des gradients de drogue pour tester les signaux suivants. Le but est de faire ça. Parce qu'on n'est pas encore staffé. On n'y arrive pas trop mal.
C'est des multi-modèles.
Alors, on a les gros systèmes, c'est des systèmes qui vont contenir 3 à 6 ml de matrice en fait, pour pouvoir vraiment faire des grosses tumeurs. Et notre autre système, c'est des puces de c'est classique. Et en fait, on a des systèmes de perfusion où on peut injecter en fait notre matrice dans des petites chips qui sont.
Et du coup, c'est à la main, c'est ça.
Parce que pour le moment, c'est relativement artisanal parce qu'on est au point. Mais le but après, c'est de scale up en fait et d'éventuellement sortir des choses où.
Du coup, c'est un labo de UCSF, c'est ça, donc c'est un américain.
Ouais. D'accord. En fait, je suis dans le laboratoire de données bactériennes.
D'accord.
J'ai plus ou moins d'indépendance.
D'accord.
Il y a des choses que je fais vraiment qui sont très pour le labo et d'autres choses que je fais.
Et ça fait combien de temps que tu as UCSF?
Ça va faire à peu près 3 ans.
D'accord, donc tu as arrêté pendant Covid, c'est ça?
Ouais. Ça, c'est super. Mais ouais, arrivé pendant Covid.
Et avant,
j'étais en France. J'étais d'abord à l'Institut Curie et après j'ai aussi un peu bossé à l'hôpital Saint-Louis en hémato.
Nous, on travaille à l'Institut Curie sur un neuroblastome avec le Goodwin Schleiermacher, je sais pas si tu vois.
Non, vaguement quelque chose. En ce moment, je suis un peu neuroblastome.
En fait, il y a pas mal
d'intérêt de Bidwise et UCSF.
Moi, franchement, super intéressé qu'on se rencontre. Moi, je suis du coup mi-temps à Red. J'habite à Red, mais on a une machine à Sunnyvale, dans la South Bay. Mais je suis quasiment les 2 tiers de mon temps ici, quoi. Et avec toute l'équipe R&D, elle est à Paris. Donc là, je repars ce week-end à Paris pour le Noël, mais soit en janvier ou même.
Ouais, là, je vais être.
Moi, je reviens
de vacances et j'ai pas mal de choses. Mais en janvier, par contre, ça
m'intéresse. Tu peux faire en décembre.
Avant le. Ouais, en fait, le truc, c'est que j'ai eu une année assez chargée. Et en fait, il y a 3-4 semaines, on ne peut plus. Du coup, j'ai fait. Je prends un break maintenant.
T'es rentré en France ou t'es allé dans le.
Non, je suis resté à la maison.
D'accord, ici.
Moi, j'aurais bien aimé aller parce que ma famille vient week-end. Je serais bien allé en Jamaïque.
Parce qu'ici, ils sont trois, tout ça faut sur Hawaï.
Ah oui, Hawaï. De toute façon, c'est Hawaï ou. Comment il s'appelle Tao.
Voilà, j'étais Tao ce week-end. Bonjour, c'est Dereck, enchanté.
Céline.
Enchanté.
Mais n'hésite pas à me contacter.
Ton mail, c'est quoi?
Ouais, c'est Antoine.forger@UCSF.
Super. De toute façon, je serai là pendant tout. Je prends un petit café, mais je serai là. Ravi d'avoir revu.
Ouais, pareil.
Bon, je t'avais pas vu et je me suis dit.
Non, je suis arrivé à 2 minutes.
Et après, je me suis levée. Je vois pas la connaissance.
Parce que je suis déposé mes affaires pendant.
download it pretty much.
What do you, are you in the Bay Area or are you from somewhere?
No, Houston.
You're in Houston, okay.
Is your last video?
You there? Yeah, je me suis dit que c'était toi aussi.
Well, yes. And then to the movie and the Holly party. Ah, yes, yeah. Ça va.
Yes, yeah, yeah, no, Valentina is great. She's good. And she's, I didn't know she still had a job position at UCSF. It's great, she's a good. Yeah, I met her through a common friend, Adam Frost, that used to be here. And we had a good party last night. And Adam is in actors now. So he invited, and I think actually they were doing the same. That's how we should do that, you know, like a panel discussion around the pool, you know.
But you have to find a pool.
Yeah. Fly everyone to have a panel discussion on the beach.
You know, so I'm not sure you know, but this I was thinking that Levan wants to do the Codanam retreat in Canada. It's very cool. It's good. I like it. Very good. But right now, how I feel, like, you really want people to go to Canada. Okay. Do you really prefer to be on the beach? No? What do you say?
Hawaii would be great, I think. Yeah. A bit more expensive for the
I'm not sure. Do you think it's not? When they fly to Vancouver?
No, but then after...
Only? Yes, and Hawaii may be double.
Yeah, and then after to rent a place,
Yeah,
it takes a price in Hawaii compared to... I mean, unless if you know like someone or that can make you a price or on a compound or something.
No, I think
You can sit here.
either here or like that, you know, so that you're kind of in between the audience and the panel. I think like that.
So we remove.
Yeah.
And yesterday, you see people line up. What do you prefer?
People line but I'm just sitting like that. Everybody sitting there. Oh, for the question, yeah. I think I will not do question during.
Yeah.
Just so we can have like a discussion with the panel.
Yeah.
And at the end, like people can line up to have questions.
And so, do you want this?
No, I can just have a mic. Or the mic as well?
Yeah, but it's a mic for the audience.
Well, I can just use that, and then when the people want to ask questions,
Okay.
I just put it here. Does that work?
Yeah, I think so. No? This is good, no?
Do you want to wear that? Yeah, great. Okay.
What do you prefer?
I have no preferences.
Okay.
This is good. So like that my hands would be
Let's
free.
turn it on.
Yeah. So I guess I just put that here. This one?
Mm-hmm. That turns it on. Okay, it's on.
Yeah.
Yep, green light means it's on.
Yeah, that works. After I have a pretty loud voice.
You do, you have a good voice.
I don't know if I really need a mic, but no, that's good. No, like that.
Yeah.
Okay.
You too.
So now I will shut up.
Oh yeah, you could just turn it off. You can turn. I just want to show you how to turn it on. So this, I think this needs to be replaced. Battery.
For what?
Oh no, it's good. Okay. I was checking the battery, making sure we have enough battery here. It looks good. It's full. Leave it off until people come in. Save the battery.
Bah ouais, comme ça, j'ai un support. Après, je l'ai en tête, mais c'est toujours bien. Ça, c'est la remarque. C'est très bien quand tu acceptes le fait que ça a des limitations. Le fait que c'est vraiment dédié à la prise de notes. Mais c'est vrai qu'après, t'as d'autres devices un peu comme ça aussi qui peuvent avoir de la couleur. Pour lire des PDF, c'est mieux. Tout ça. Par contre, pour la prise de notes, c'est vrai que c'est un super fit. C'est très bien. Et puis, du coup, moi, en fait, quand j'ai besoin, je me balade qu'avec ça. Et je peux prendre des notes partout. Tu peux bien organiser tes notes aussi.
Tu peux même annoter les PDF.
Tu peux annoter les PDF, mais honnêtement, les PDF là-dessus, c'est pas top, ça rame un peu, je trouve. Après, il faudrait que je vérifie, ça fait un moment que je ne l'ai pas fait, je sais qu'ils ont optimisé. Mais ce qui est pas mal aussi, c'est une feature que j'utilise pas encore beaucoup, mais tu peux. Ça transforme ton écriture assez bien en Word document, tu vois, tu peux faire ça. Donc ça, c'est pratique aussi. Mais honnêtement, jusqu'à présent, je l'ai pas beaucoup utilisé.
Et il a vachement utilisé. Après, il a arrêté. Et le truc a pété, donc je l'ai changé. Je me suis dit, si j'utilise ça, moi j'utilise. Dès que j'ai pris, il n'a jamais donné. Je dis non. Mais tu l'utilisais pas. Qu'est-ce que j'avais oublié? Mais maintenant que je vois que tu l'as pris, je reprends.
D'accord, sympa.
Et lui, sinon, c'est vrai, sinon il est comme moi, il a des post-it partout. Et du coup, ça, c'est pas mal.
Ouais, non, ça c'est pas mal. C'est pas mal. Après, là, moi je vois, parce que ça fait un moment que je l'utilise, je me dis, bon, il faut que je m'assoie et que je prenne du temps pour refaire mon organisation. Parce qu'il y a des trucs qui sont un peu all over et des fois j'ai un peu de mal à trouver certains documents. Mais globalement, c'est quand même bien. Ah non, mais c'est pas le problème des notes en général. Mais le truc qui est con, tu vois, c'est que t'as la possibilité de le faire bien. Et au bout d'un moment, tu te rends compte, merde, en fait, là, j'ai déconné, ça devrait bien marcher, mais j'arrive plus à m'y retrouver parce que j'ai fait trop de subcatégories où certaines choses sont pas dans les bonnes subcatégories et du coup, il faut un peu. J'essaie de pas plus trier par thématique que par date, mais des fois, tu as des thématiques qui sont un peu en overlap, et puis tu as des thématiques. Alors, souvent, en fait, c'est ça mon gros problème, c'est que tu vas avoir une thématique globale. Et dans cette thématique globale, tu as une thématique qui va être budding, tu vois, qui est naissante. Donc tu commences à faire des choses là-dedans. Puis après, ce truc-là, en fait, commence à devenir quelque chose par lui-même, un vrai projet, un truc. Et du coup, tu dis, bon, moi, je vais leur faire un truc dédié. Et après, des fois, c'est là où, en fait, je me perds un peu entre où est-ce que sont mes notes. Est-ce que c'était dans le truc parental ou est-ce que c'est dans le truc dédié, et des fois, du coup, c'est un peu chiant. Mais sinon, à part ça, non, c'est bien. Là où j'étais un tout petit peu déçu, c'est dans tout ce qui est pouvoir lire des PDF, des trucs comme ça, ça rame un peu. Après, ça fait un moment que du coup je l'ai pas fait, je sais qu'ils ont fait des optimisations. Donc faut que je vérifie. Ouais, je pense.
Ouais, je pense. Peut-être qu'ils peuvent venir.
Ouais, il faut les faire rentrer comme ça.
Yeah, wait, let's wait for it. Yeah. It's okay. Yeah.
Yeah, I think there's two to share between three of you.
Yeah.
So welcome everyone for the last panel of our symposium. We will talk about ethical consideration of AI in healthcare, and this panel will be moderated by Antoine Forger, associate researcher here at UCSF.
Thank you, Céline. And welcome everyone. It's a pleasure to have you. I think actually it's kind of nice to finish by ethical consideration, because one thing I've noticed is that in every panel we had before, ethical consideration were mentioned several times. I was almost worried we would have nothing to talk about, but we do have stuff to talk about. So anyway, I'm going to let our nice panel to introduce themselves. I think what is great also is that we have a very diverse point of view on ethics. So if you can introduce yourself and maybe give like some kind of notion of what is your background in ethics and AI. Maybe we can start with you, Zara.
So my name is Zara Timsa. I lead the Data Transformation and Artificial Intelligence Department at IQVIA. And as you guys probably know, IQVIA is a CRO, but also it's one of the hugest data marketplaces in the US. We focus a lot on artificial intelligence and machine learning offerings. So as you can imagine, there's a lot of innovation going on, whether it's to be used internally or externally with stakeholders. So some of the companies that we work with, collaborate and partner with, you have Pfizer, for example, you have Takeda, and all of these big pharmaceutical companies. So my work really is operational, technical, but also focuses a lot on compliance and ethics. So I represent IQVIA with the US Senate and also the FDA. So I'm heavily involved in this field, and hopefully today I don't disappoint. So prior to IQVIA, I worked in the highly regulated insurance industry. I was an executive at MassMutual. And before that, for about 13 years or so, I worked at multiple biopharmaceutical companies as an executive, specifically focused on oncology. I did my fair share in academia. I was a faculty member at the University of Leeds in the UK. So for my background, I hold a PhD in cancer biology, master's in molecular biology, and also an MBA. So yeah, thank you guys for having me here, and
All right, aloha everybody. Thank you so much for having us. It was really cool the evening we had yesterday as well, and getting to connect and compare notes kind of across geopolitical boundaries. My name is Keolu Fox. I'm a professor at UCSD. I am a director of our Indigenous Futures Institute for the UC system. I have a background in genome sciences, mostly focusing on sequencing and editing technologies. You can hear me well?
Yeah.
Okay, good. And I also have other hats that I wear. I founded something with other Indigenous co-founders called the Native Biodata Consortia. We just received a large grant from the United States government's NIH. And I also am involved in and I'm a co-founder of something called Abundant Intelligence AI. This is indigenous-driven artificial intelligence technologies, focusing on things like machine learning, deep learning, federated learning, et cetera. And then I have a startup that we've created called Variant Bio, which interfaces with the therapeutics. It's based in Seattle, Washington. So a lot of different things going on. And I suppose from the ethics point of view, I have a confession. I'm not an ethicist. I'm just Hawaiian. And, and our interface with the United States government and colonialism and the military-industrial complex and the tourism-industrial complex has had a profound impact in the way I think about science and bias and risk and safety and many of the things that we'll talk about today. So looking forward to tell you all about that. Mahalo.
Thank you. Hi everyone. My name is Hubert Etienne. Thank you very much for organizing this and for having us. And so my background is in moral philosophy. I'm a philosopher by training. And this is a bit outdated because I don't work at Meta anymore, but I used to be the ethics lead for generative AI products and models. And now I'm still a researcher in AI ethics, but I'm fundraising actually. So if you know people who have money, fundraising to open a research center in Paris at Sciences Po dedicated to train the population and do research on responsible AI, or what we call AI ethics. And in terms of research, my research was mostly focused on what I call computational philosophy, which is which kind of approach can we develop and models to actually analyze data between philosophers and machine learning engineers. So like developing new kind of frameworks for collaborative frameworks, but also a way of working and analyzing data together.
Okay, thank you. Well, just very brief introduction. I think I have to do the mandatory disclosure that I'm a French person, but you can hear that. Also, so basically, my background is really cancer, molecular biologist, and I kind of fell progressively into the system biology of cancer. And once you start to put your finger into that, you quickly go toward machine learning nowadays. And so I've been involved in a project that was initiated by the NIH. It's called Bridge to AI, which have a very strong ethics component into it. And being me and being always very curious about what other fields do, I quickly got to interact with the ETCs that are involved in that project, and that's kind of how I ended up here. Anyway, so I think it's a very large topic, so we try to structure it to some extent. And so I want to talk about 4 main aspects of ethics and AI, and I think it has been already a bit touched by every panel, but and kind of in a progressive way to talk about data origin and data generation, then about what are the ethical considerations you should have when you actually develop machine learning tools, then about the users and the usage of those tools, and finally, like on a more, trying to have a discussion on a more broader scale about the direct and indirect impact of machine learning and ethics on our broad societies. So starting with data origin and data construction, like the first question that I want to ask is very general, which is like, in your opinion, how ethics is essential to actually be involved in sourcing data and data generation. And so it's a very wide topic, but if you can give like maybe like your key thought about that aspect.
Yeah, I think I can go first. So when it comes to data sourcing, I think we have to be very careful, right? So there are so many ways where you can get the data from. So let's take, for example, patient data. So if you're getting data from patients, let's say you are focusing here on patient health information, and in the US you have to abide by HIPAA and all of these laws, and it can get really, really stringent. So the first thing you have to do is make sure you have all the right consents in place, all the right paperwork in place, and you can explain to patients what these, basically these consent forms are about. So you are dealing, there is this human interaction, especially if the patient, let's say, is a geriatric patient, right? So now we have covered the consent, we have explained to the patient exactly what we're gonna do with the data. And we didn't really breach that. Like, for example, I didn't take your data and you are a cancer patient and I use it for marketing purposes, okay? So this is one thing. Now let's say if you are using a platform, right, like a social media platform, like Facebook or whatnot. In this situation, of course, you have to consent, right, to using the platform and for the platform in a way or another to use your data for insight generation. So that's another way to consent. Now, I would like to touch upon data that is collected from open sources and repositories. So in this case, you have to make sure that the data you are collecting, the data you're collating, processing, and whatnot comes from sources that are trustworthy. Like if it's research and whatnot, let's say I'm using PubMed, right? But at the same time, I'm abiding with all the licenses. Like if I'm using TCGA, well, you know, read the fine print, okay? So one final thing, because I want to give these guys a chance to talk as well. So it's important not only to think about the source of the data, but also the journey of the data, right? Like think about lineage, right? Think about veracity of data. I'm not going to define what these two are, but they are very important. And my advice to companies out there or research institutes is to follow what they call the FAIR of data: findability, accessibility, interoperability, of course, and reusability of data. And that can be achieved through data catalogs. And I'm just going to give an example of one that I like, Elation. So, thank you.
Oh, yeah, sure. There's also care principles, too. Yeah. I think it's okay. But, I mean, I like that there are standards that people have to follow for transparency. Yeah, yeah. Coming from the genomics point of view, so do you guys know what the most valuable commodity on planet Earth is today? Okay, take a guess, somebody. Anyone? It's not a trick question, but no, but it's data itself. So data has now surpassed oil in 2007. I mean, according to a whole bunch of fancy economics people, but it is extremely valuable. So when, generally speaking, when we are making philosophical arguments about the greater good, and we're saying, you know, you should join this giant genome sequencing, you know, project, all of us, and you should contribute your DNA to this process, this project. It's going to benefit, I don't know, historically marginalized communities. What we're not saying is what the potential use and misuse of the information is. So the data fits neatly into something that's called the big data surveillance ecosystem. And you've heard this term before from Shoshana Zuboff, right? The idea that it's valuable, it fits into this apparatus, it can be commodified. And now with all of these incredible techniques that we've been hearing about, all of the learnings that are going on, you can commodify it and you can expedite the trajectory to develop new drugs that hit the market, right? That's what we're doing at Variant Bio. That's what Regeneron is doing. That's what Vertex is doing with their new sickle cell therapy that just hit the market. So the greater good, you should be asking yourself, whose greater good are we talking about here? If a drug is developed and then hits the market and is sold to you for $300,000 a year, that's highly problematic, right? So if you evaluate the whole apparatus and you understand the origin or the provenance of the data, and it comes from individual people, and in the case of evolutionary history and natural selection, that's a gift from your ancestors, from your diaspora, your migratory history, and it's commodified in this linear way and optimized for profit and exponential growth. We have a problem, right? And it's mostly unregulated. Who saw what happened with 23andMe this week? What happened? Tell me.
The data was
Stolen. There was a data breach. There was a small percentage of data that was gleaned from screenshots. It wasn't like there was a VCF on Discord and somebody sold it to the highest bidder. It was very clever people that have knowledge about how population genetics works. I'm not saying it's an inside job. I'm just saying it's a very interesting thing that happened, right? And now that company is worthless. Worthless. And so earlier when people were talking about security breaches, I'm like, man, we have to talk about this. This is a very real future for a lot of people's enterprises. So anyways, just a few kind of ideas to share.
Maybe to add on this, the question is, why is it so valuable? And I promised myself I would only cite philosophers who came here in California today. So first one will be Foucault. I guess everyone knows Foucault. The question here, a couple of years ago, we used to have these debates, especially in France, around like who owns the data. And you had people like Gaspar Koenig, I don't cite him because he's not here, but saying, yeah, maybe we should, compensate people for the data. And like we had all these people like modeling how much money should we give to people, when we use the data and so on. I feel this debate is out of age. We don't talk about this anymore because now we understood like nobody owns the data anymore. You don't own your data anymore. And I'm not just talking about social media. I'm talking about any kind of data, even sensitive data, even healthcare data. So of course we want to pay attention. We want it to be anonymized and so on. But we do have clusters in France. When you have a data cluster, when people can come, institutions and startups can come and train the model on it's becoming public data. But nobody gave consent. That's why I don't really believe in consent. But it's a controversial claim, so we won't talk about it today. I really don't believe in that. And the point is that why we're just giving up all our rights and ownership on this is because we live in a world where we say we need to know what's going on. If we don't know, other people we know. And if other people we know, they will get power on us. So we want to know it. And I will just close on this because I mentioned Foucault. Why is Foucault important here? Because he understood something a couple of decades ago. He understood that at some point in the modern states, all states we used to say you want to be powerful, you just go and invade other countries. And then you have a huge empire and you're powerful. That's the old-fashioned reason of state. Now the reason of state is the state understands that they need to control the population. How does it work? If you want to be strong, you need to understand how your people work. And so you can, make them work in certain areas. You want to build a startup nation, you need to force your people, give them the right incentive to build a startup nation. You want them to do research, you need to give them the right incentive to do research. You want them to contribute to the GDP, and so on. So this is what he calls like the reversal between the external objective, conquests, and the internal objective. Know your people and direct them in the way that will make the state more powerful. And I will just close on this. How do you know that? By doing research, by collecting data. And when you know your population, you also know the other people. If you know how to control your people, you know how to control the others. I won't talk about TikTok today, but we all know they have different strategies. So you can be, by knowing who you are, your population, you can also use it in an adversarial way against other populations.
Thank you so much. I mean, it's pretty much all my follow-up questions you've addressed on that topic. But I would like to, especially like that aspect of ownership of the data and the power of the data and how important it's actually to be able to have a framework around who owns those data, who uses those data. And so we talked a bit about consent, which was one of the things I wanted to approach, but I think it was pretty well talked about. And one thing you mentioned, Hubert, is anonymity of the data, which is always something that we claim we can do. But the thing is that it becomes more and more apparent with machine learning tools that actually with a few data points, you can trace back to whom those data belong to. And this is also something that cause ethics issue and that we would likely have to take in consideration. Do you have any reflection on that? And then we can move on to the next topic.
I would like to just add one thing. I mean, I'm here like in the US. In Europe, I think AI, ML, and data is more regulated than the US. So when we say consent, for example, let's say you're using a social media platform, consent is a must, right? Otherwise, they won't let you use the platform to begin with. So you have to scroll all the way down or you get this cookie banner. And if you don't click I accept, then you don't get the right to use the platform. So this is what they call in Europe black patterns, right? And they're trying to get rid of these. In the US, they're not paying attention to that because data is king, of course, right? So in Europe as well, there is something called the, I think GDPR touched upon it, right to be forgotten, right? So you have the right and the ability to ask a specific platform like, hey, I don't want you to use my data anymore. Remove me from your system. We don't have that in the US, okay? So that's why I keep on talking about consent. It's a very gray area, and definitely it needs more work. I mean, we'll get there, hopefully.
Thank you. So I would like to move on to like the aspect of machine learning tool development and how to actually, what is the point of view in terms of ethic perspective, especially like how to avoid bias from developers, which is like kind of like the first step. It's one point we discussed a bit before with Sarah. And in a second time, but maybe it will lead to that, is also like, how do we approach trust in AI, like between what kind of feedback mechanism needs to be put in place? It's something that has been talked a lot about in previous panel as well. And what is the advantage of those feedback mechanism compared to, let's say, like interpretable machine learning system? And what is your opinion on all of that, basically? So it's kind of the same, like a discussion between you guys on all of that.
Do you want me to be the first victim? All right. Okay, so bias, right? Bias in AI. Now, when you talk about artificial intelligence, there are three different sources of bias, right? So there is the bias that is coming from the data itself. So the data itself might not be representative. It might be skewed towards one, let's say, ethnic group versus another, age group versus another. And having worked in the insurance industry, I can really appreciate that because it can affect your finances. You might get, let's say, a more expensive premium. You might even have your mortgage application declined because of that. So there is bias in data. Now, there is also bias in the machine learning model itself, especially now with the era of neural networks upon neural networks, which they call transformers, which is part of GPT, right? Generative pre-trained transformers. Now, I'm not saying it's rocket science. Transformers have been there since 2017. Right? But there is always this black box effect. There is this hidden layer. So you have a bunch of data inputted, you have a bunch of data outputted. But how did the model itself get to the conclusion, right? So there is this kind of like bias that could be baked into the model. And now that is bias generated by the model itself, touching upon the bias introduced by the developer, which is the third type of bias I'm going to talk about today. Now, developers, unfortunately, like at companies, especially when we get new engineers, let's say, sometimes they're not experienced enough. So they can introduce unintentional bias. So it's not really intentional. It's not like there are prejudice or the racist or something. No, it's just unintentional. They just don't have the experience, or unfortunately, they're not working with good data sets. Right? So then how do you solve that? Well, you can solve it at so many levels. For me, the most effective way is cultural. Train them, right? Like get them up to date on the different regulations going on like out there. Like tell them what the FTC is doing, what GDPR, what HIPAA is. Like educate them more and more. Maybe introduce some policies, standards, and controls that are fit for purpose. Some companies, for example, at this point, want to work at a thought leadership level, right? They don't want to practice. They don't want to put actionable practices in place because it might hinder innovation. Also, and finally, this would be my last point for developers on how you can avoid bias is you have so many technical tools out there. Right? Not just tools, but also like methods, okay? So for example, like you can do ensemble models. I can think about cross-validation or even like limit the features, get rid of irrelevant features in your machine learning model. The more features, the more data, the more techniques, the more bias.
I like that. I'll add, I think let's go under the hood. Let's ask the questions about the actual software itself and the hardware itself, for example. All right. How many languages that we use to program are created by certain classes of people? Because right now we're having a conversation in English. These folks could have a conversation in French. They'd probably prefer that. But I'm talking about the actual digital connective tissue and infrastructure that we're building the future with. So what languages are people using here? Anyone? No one? Nobody actually scripts? We're in freaking... I mean, R, throw something out. Python, Java, C, right? Okay, who's creating those languages as mediums in which we communicate ideas and organize information? You know, that's a really, really important point. So with our abundant intelligences, we're actually examining those ideas. How many computer languages were created by indigenous people? Someone guess. If you get it right, I have a sticker from Native Biodata Consortia. Anyone?